It is a movement around police accountability, and it was for good cops not to be broad-brushed, and good citizens not to be in any way given to this kind of police excessive force, and in this case, murder. We had at no time knew when we started that there would be any indictment, less known conviction. But we went anyway and kept going and kept marching. Many of you may recall on August 28th, Martin Luther King III and I had a huge march in Washington on the anniversary of his father's I Have a Dream speech. And National Action Network was the lead organization. And we had 204,000 people come in a pandemic. And they marched. But they did not just march about how angry we were and are. They marched around saying we want demonstration and legislation. We want to see the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act passed by the Congress. When we saw a movement like this in the 60s, it led to the Civil Rights Act of '64. You cannot have a movement that is of any way, shape, and form progressively successful if there is no legislation. As we speak today, the Floyd family is in Washington. Yesterday, in the late afternoon, President Biden called me and we talked. He said, Al, you were there when I met with them when I was running. He met with us the day before the Houston funeral. He says, and I want to meet, check in. I want to talk to his daughter. I will never forget, I was in the room when George's daughter looked at then presidential candidate, Joe Biden, and said, my dad changed the world. And he says, I want to see her, and they're going to meet. And I told him that, again, I say the same thing I said throughout, Mr. President, we want to see legislation. We know that the president had a hard deadline of today. I told him we'd rather have hard legislation and a soft deadline than a soft piece of legislation, and a hard deadline. So feel free, I told him, to quote me on that. We want something that works. And we want it from all sides. It is in the interest of all Americans that we meet the moment with real concrete legislation. Let me be also clear. Not only did we see an outpouring that was multiracial and intergenerational, unlike we'd seen on this issue, and I'd been on this issue for many years, we also saw, as I sat with the family at the trial, I went to Minneapolis several times. This was the first time that I saw 10 policemen go and testify against a fellow officer, which means that even good cops understand that it's time for us to stop this. The chief of police in Minneapolis testified against Mr. Chauvin. But a conviction of Chauvin is not enough. We cannot keep going hoping we get the right evidence, hoping we get the right jury. We must have legislation that defines and refines what police excessive force is all about. And it must come from a federal level so states cannot opt out and go whichever way they want. I called the mayor and asked the mayor would he stand with us today. And we co-convene, we invite others. As we stand on this day 1 year later, this city has had to deal with this issue. And we have been able in the city and the state to have the Eric Garner law. The federal government needs to do what was done here. Make law, not make speeches, not hold press conferences. Federal government needs to do what we did, make law. It is against the law to do a chokehold now in the city and state of New York. And it must be against the law to do the things that are outlined in the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. So I'm going to ask the mayor, who agreed to co-convene this with me, to have some remarks. Then, as we want to dramatize to the world the insensitivity and outright total lack of any concern that this officer had, he put his knee on the neck of George Floyd for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. We are going to bow on our knee here for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. I want you, when I did the first eulogy, I talked about how at that time we thought it was 8 minutes and 46 seconds. People told me just standing that long exhausted them. You've got to have a lot of disregard for the law, disregard for a human being, to have something throbbing under you that long. So this is not just theatrics. This is to drive the point home that a man could put his knee on someone's neck that long. And somewhere along the way, you would think he would have thought about his training. Somewhere along the way, doesn't humanity kick in and you say, wait a minute, this guy's suffering. He never in that length of time got his knee off his neck. But what he did know was when he put his knee on his neck, he put his knee on police brutality in this country that will never be the same again. I said to George Floyd rally in Minneapolis day before yesterday, where I joined his family, that George Floyd should not just go down in history as a martyr. He should go down in history as the turning point of how we deal with policing in the United States. It was the killing of Emmett Till that drove the civil rights movement that led to 64. It was the killing of Jimmy Lee Jackson in Marion, Alabama, which is why Dr. King and John Lewis and Hosea Williams went to Selma. It is the killing of George Floyd that will change policing in the United States going forward, and we're determined to continue to do what is necessary to make that happen. I bring to you the mayor of the city of New York, Mayor Bill de Blasio.
Rev, I want to say too many families for too many years have needed to call you. And every single time you were there. You were there for a family in pain that should not have been in pain, but you were there for a higher purpose as well. And you've been indispensable, calling this nation to justice. Thank you, and God bless you for that. We saw a murder. Let's be clear why there is so much anger, why it will not stop. We saw a murder before our eyes committed by someone who was supposed to exemplify law, was supposed to protect. He took an innocent life, and everything that we had been told was backwards. And I understand anyone who felt betrayed in that moment. Because Rev's right. How do you forget someone's humanity? Well, because for 400 years in this country, the persistent, obsessive training was to tell white people not to value black lives. It was everywhere you turned. And it poisoned the mind to that officer, and what he did disgusts me to this hour of this day. And it tells us that so much more needs to change. We cannot let our country be a lie. We cannot let our ideals be a lie. We can't show the generations coming up that everything we told them wasn't real. We, in fact, have to make it real. And we have the power to do it. For anyone who at this moment feels pain or cynicism or doubt, I understand you, but I also appeal to you to look at what this movement has done in the last year. All over this nation, Laws are changing. All over this nation, police are being held accountable in ways before not imaginable because of a movement of people. But that movement cannot end. That, to me, is the message that a man who should be standing with us, should be with his family, should be alive. He's gone, but we are here. And it's our job to now finish this mission. In Washington, the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act is the least we can do to honor him. But it has to happen. It has to happen. Unless the ideal and the dream that is this nation turns out to be a lie. We can't let it be a lie. We have to call ourselves to that higher purpose and demand that our nation live up to its ideals. In this city, we know we can do better. I remember years ago on this stage when people said, you can't get rid of stop and frisk. It'll lead to disorder and crime. That was a false choice. We got rid of it, and we got safer, and we got more just. And so many times we've proven, do not accept the lie. Fight for justice, fight for change. It can be done. We can change the culture of policing. Rev said it. We saw police officers come forward with their own anger and disgust and say, that's not us. We don't accept that. So change can happen. Change will happen because of us. I leave you with this. I wondered how to talk about this moment where you could be overwhelmed by pain or you could try to find a way forward. And a friend sent me this quote from Valerie Cower, and it says so much. What if this darkness is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if our America is not dead, but a country that is waiting to be born? What if the story of our country is one long labor? What if this is our nation's great transition? Breathe. Push. We will breathe in love, through love. And my friends, we will make this a country worthy of the words it says. We will make it a country that acts in that spirit and protects all of us. That is the America we can build together. Thank you, and God bless you all.
As we begin to bow, you could take this platform, and then after you hear from Congressman Jeffries and others, I see Councilman Carnegie, if you want to join us, Stacey Lynch, if you want to join us, any that want to join in the knee bending. Those that do not want to bow for whatever reasons, that is not the story. It's not who got down. It's whether America will get up. Amen. As we took that knee, imagine how long that was on a human being's neck. Never switched knees, just dug in. It's time we correct policing in this country. We will hear first from the fourth member of Congress in terms of fourth in line in leadership of the Democratic Caucus of the United States House of Representatives, Congressman from Brooklyn, and a member of National Action Network for many years, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries.
Well, thank you, Reverend Sharpton, for once again convening us. We know that Reverend Sharpton is a voice for the voiceless, a defender of the disenfranchised, and a powerful, profound, prophetic, principled preacher in the great tradition of Dr. King and Jesse Jackson. We thank you, Reverend Sharpton, for all you do for the community, for the city, and for the country. To my colleagues in government, to Mayor de Blasio, all those assembled. The scripture says that suffering may endure during the long night, but joy will come in the morning. And for a long time in the United States of America, our communities have been suffering. Systemic racism has been in the soil of America for more than 400 years. We've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. Jim Crow may be dead, he still has some nieces and nephews that are alive and well. And it manifests itself in terms of police violence, police brutality, and the police use of excessive force. Suffering for a long time. Here in the city, from Eleanor Bumpers to Anthony Baez, from Anthony Baez to Abner Louima, from Abner Louima to Amadou Diallo, from Amadou Diallo to Patrick Dorismond, from Patrick Dorismond to Sean Bell, from Sean Bell to Omar Edwards, from Omar Edwards to Eric Garner, and so many names in between. Suffering for a long time. But then a year ago today, America saw what brutality and inhumanity looks like and decided that we've had enough. So over the last year, people of every race, of every generation, of every religion, yet led by young African-American women and men and great civil rights leaders like Al Sharpton, folks from across the country showed up to demand justice for George Floyd. And we received a just verdict. Guilty, guilty, guilty. When you show up, when you speak up, when you stand up, good things happen and justice will occur. So now the struggle as I close continues, because the verdict was just the beginning in the journey for justice. We've got to continue to show up as we will in Brooklyn and in Harlem. Show up on 145th Street and show up on Fulton Street. Show up in the Bronx and show up in Queens. Show up in blue states and show up in red states. Show up at City Hall and show up in Albany. Show up in the House, show up in the Senate, show up at the Supreme Court, show up at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. We're going to show up until the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is signed into law, until we knock out systemic racism and continue America's long, necessary, and majestic march toward a more perfect union. We'll show up until it's morning time in America.
Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. Jennifer Jones Austin.
Thank you. Reverend Sharpton, you and I both know that we were raised to go to God in prayer whenever we can't find the words or the moment to fully express how we think and how we feel. And as I kneeled for those 9 moments, I prayed. I prayed for George Floyd's family. I prayed for all of the families that have known systemic racism in policing firsthand. I prayed for our community, that we stay strong even as we fight this battle. I prayed for the policy leaders and the policy influencers at the city and the state and the federal levels, that their hearts may be softened, that they may lean in and see our experiences and change their minds. Some of them change their wicked ways. And I prayed for the police in this city, in this state, and in this nation, those who are good, that they may develop the courage and the conviction to stand up when they see inhumanity and injustice practiced by their fellow police officers. And I prayed for those who are actually doing these harmful acts, that they may change their ways. In this moment, we've got to press on, but we've also got to pray. Those of us who know how to pray, we've got to pray, because only with God are we going to get to the other side of this. In everyday affairs, 9 minutes and 29 seconds seems a relatively short period of time. But as we've all just experienced, it's excruciatingly long when kneeling. And for George Floyd, it must have been excruciatingly long, excruciatingly slow, and excruciatingly painful. In the years since he was murdered by a cop without cause while other cops stood idly by, many have become woke to what Reverend Sharpton and others have been crying out for decades. Systemic racism and bias pervades policing in America. As a child and family advocate, an anti-poverty advocate, and an anti-racist advocate, I'm heartened, like many of you, to see police, people, everyday persons of all races and ethnicities, all coming together to demand reform and accountability. Here in New York, I've been humbled to work with Mayor de Blasio and Commissioner Shea to bring about true reform. When the policing reform plan that has just been passed is implemented, it will hopefully end racialized policing, end the criminalization of poverty, bring about greater transparency and accountability, and also bring an end to chokehold, real chokehold practices and other serious injury practices that threaten the lives of so many people of color. I'm proud today to serve as the chair of the New York City Racial Justice Commission, the first of its kind in this nation, to dismantle systemic structural racism in the charter laws that for so long have propped up systemic racism and inequity. I have hope, given the challenges that we've seen, but the changes that many who in power are committing themselves to, that we will see a better day. But I'm also ever mindful that there are many who aren't embracing these changes, but still we have to press on. We have to secure the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. As a child and family advocate, an anti-racist advocate, and an anti-poverty advocate, I'm also ever mindful that the over-policing of black and brown communities is but one facet of systemic racism and institutionalized inequity that plague communities of color across the United States. Sadly, being black in America does not put you at greater risk of dying prematurely, simply at the hands or the needs of police. Our children, our men and women, are dying excruciatingly long, excruciatingly slow, and excruciatingly painful deaths from systemic racism in every pillar of our society: income deprivation, subpar education, low-quality health care, environmentally hazardous housing, injustice in every facet of the justice system. On this day, as we mark the 1-year anniversary of the killing of George Floyd, I pray, I implore us all to continue the fight for racial justice and equity in policing and in every other pillar of our society. God bless us all.
Congressman Adriano Espia.
Thank you, Reverend Sharpton. It's been a year.
365 days, and still we must move on. And the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act must be adopted into law. And when we show up, we should know the content of it, because we march for things that are very precise, Reverend, very consequential, very important to our community. To eliminate the chokehold, to eliminate the knee, to establish a registry of bad police officers. You know, the Department of Motor Vehicle, if you speed too much on the roads, will suspend your license and then they will revoke your license. But a bad police officer will go around crashing into people's lives and he won't get suspended nor revoked. Willful neglect versus reckless neglect. The current law says that you got to have willful neglect to be prosecuted and held accountable. That means that you almost got to wake up in the morning, Reverend, and say to yourself, I'm going to do this, and go and execute that. In the court of law, and I'm not a lawyer, but the congressman from Brooklyn is, that's nearly impossible. But reckless neglect, which is what occurs in a heated moment, in a second that could take somebody's life, is not held accountable by the law. So reckless neglect must be the standard within the George Floyd Justice as Policing Act to prosecute bad cops. These are the things at the city level. There are things that could be done at the city level. There are things that the Senator, Baron Benjamin, has done at the state level. And then there are things that we can do at the federal level. Because this is a national epidemic. It's not just local. It's not just in English. It's also in Hispanic and Chinese. And so we must continue to move forward. This Justice and Policing Act must be passed, must be adopted into law. We must know in clear details what it entails so we eradicate once and for all bad police officers and police brutality across America. Thank you.
From the New York Civil Liberties Union, Donna Lieberman.
Thank you so much, Reverend Sharpton, for bringing us together in the House of Justice today to honor the memory of George Floyd, who was tortured and murdered by the police because of the color of his skin. So many times we have seen Black people tortured and murdered by the so-called forces of law and order. So many times when the brutal beating of Rodney King was captured on video, when the NYPD pumped 40 bullets into Amadou Diallo in the lobby of his own building, when the NYPD choked Eric Garner to death, and when the Rochester police killed Daniel Prude as he suffered a mental health crisis. So many times we have seen the naked racism in American policing wreak unimaginable harm and pain. And too many times we've come together to say enough. But this time must be different. This time, the Black Lives Matter, decades of work, the movement for social justice is generating a national reckoning with racism. And if we're going to end the regime of racism and injustice that is built in so deeply to our nation, we must stand together to overhaul the way we keep our people, all our people, safe and healthy. We must end the unconscionable wealth gap in this country. We must end the regime of mass incarceration and bloated law enforcement and reinvest in our communities, in social services, public health, and education. We must end the over-policing of black and brown communities. Get cops out of schools. Get cops out of the job that they are totally unqualified for, the job of being first responders to mental health emergencies. Get rid of the vice squad and broken windows policing that target black and brown people for harassment. Stop pandering to the police unions whose racist rhetoric and behavior is itself a threat to public safety. And hold police accountable to serve and protect all of us. The NYCLU stands with Reverend Sharpton, the National Action Network, Hazel Dukes, Jennifer Jones Austin, the faith leaders and political leaders here today to say his name, George Floyd. George Floyd. To say their names and to work as hard as we can to bend the arc of history toward justice. Thank you. Thank you.
President of the New York State chapters of the branches of the NAACP, Hazel Dukes.
Thank you, Reverend Sharpton. When I received a call from my colleague, Derry Pearson, that to be here today at 12 o'clock, I had another appointment. That's why I was a little late. But nothing was, because we have been standing here for years. Even before we got to the House of Justice, Reverend, we've been in the street. We've been all in, you name it. I laid down in Lincoln Tunnel. You and Reverend Richardson had told me to do that, and I did it. I stopped the cars from going in and out of New York, you know what I mean? And then went to One Police Plaza, and Kelly had to get us out because they brought me a bologna sandwich. And I said I wanted pizza and started beating the walls. I come today to join with Reverend Sharpton, who's been the voice, and to our elected officials, Hakeem Jeffries, and to Brian Benjamin, who has put forth legislation, and to Jennifer Jones Austin, who called me yesterday to do another job to try to bring this city together. There's a song we sing in the Baptist church. I've been running for a long time, but I'm not tired yet. We're not tired. We had hoped that the President of the United States could have this day that we would say that it is done. It did not happen because we got some other people, as Jennifer Jones said, that, you know, their heart is not right. And I'm not going to judge them because there is going to be a judgment day. There's going to be a judgment day. Every man, every knee shall bow. There's somebody bigger than McConnell and McCarthy and Green. Bigger. So I'm going to leave it there with them. But I'm going to keep on marching with Reverend Sharpton. I'm going to keep on calling. I'm going to keep seeing that legislation is passed in the state of New York. Reverend Sharpton and Gwen Carr and Ms. Bell, we received the pen when the governor of the state signed. But that's not enough. That's not enough. The bill must be what Congressman Esmeralda say. If you're a bad cop in New York City, you can't go to Nassau County. If you're a bad cop in Rockland, you can't go to New York City. We got to have more than just that law at the federal level. We got to have it at every level, at every county in this state and in this nation. And Reverend Sharpton, with your voice and with your leadership and with our ministers, with our elected officials, we're going to do that. Thank you so much.
Representing the faith community, let me tell you what we're going to do. I just received a voice from Philonis Floyd telling me they have left Speaker Pelosi's office and headed to the White House. They're calling me every step of the way, tell me what's happening, and they watched some of what we did on our knee. I'm going to have representing the faith community first, my pastor and Reverend Dr. Adolphus Lacey, and then Reverend Johnny Green, and then I'm going to have Rachel Nordlinger, who was featured in, which was it now? You get so much Cranes and others. to MC the rest as I start my syndicated radio show and bring Congressman Espy out in the back to give me the extra 5 minutes that he did not join us on our knee. Reverend Lacy.
Thank you, Reverend Sharpton, for the opportunity to be able to get here with you and with all those that are assembled with us to draw attention to the tragedy that took place more than a year ago. And memorials can sometimes lose their significance when they get detached from the things that called them into being. And on behalf of the faith community, we're reminded of what God told the children of Israel. When you cross the river and your children see these stones, they say, what meaneth these stones? And these stones mean that your God brought you out of the land of bondage into the land of freedom. And so we just gathered here because what I want to say is right now the numbers have already been able to change. When this situation first took place, more than 80% of Americans thought it was a bad idea. But not now. They think it wasn't murder. But we got here to say it is murder. And I thank God for Reverend Sharpton and all those who are assembled here to remind us that just you cannot blink something away. You cannot cause something to disappear. And so therefore we evoke the name of God, that God would bless Reverend Sharpton and all and the Floyd family and all families that are affected by any type of violence. Because if ever we needed the Lord before, surely we need the Lord right now. And one of the critiques of the faith community is that sometimes just because you don't see us doesn't mean that we're not there. Doesn't mean that we're not paying for buses or paying for water or paying for bologna sandwiches or bailing somebody out or being able to hold up the bloodstained banner. So even as we kneeled, we still continue to be a wall of Jericho standing strong. So again, thank you, Reverend Sharpton, for this opportunity.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, Senator Brian Benjamin.
It is hard to be here right now because as I think about the 9 minutes and 29 seconds I was on my knee, I had some thoughts about getting up, but I knew with everyone here I couldn't get up because it is insane that a cop would do that to anybody. And I am more than concerned that we get caught up in the moment and not focus on the work for the future. You know, when President Obama got elected in 2008, while many of us were sipping tea and enjoying his election, the Republicans were organizing on the state level. They got together and said, if they don't have the White House, we're going to pass bills in every single state to undermine the President of the United States. Well, we have a flip strategy of that now that we started under Donald Trump. And in New York State, we have control of the Senate and control of the legislature and control of the governor's office. And we're passing bills to ensure that no matter what happens on the federal level, we are going to do everything we can to have justice in New York State for the people who have been victims of police brutality. Very simply, you know, Reverend Sharpton talked about the Eric Garner Chokehold Act, Anti-Chokehold Act earlier. When I got that bill a few years ago, there wasn't people clamoring to carry the Eric Garner Anti-Chokehold Act. Actually, when I became a senator, the bill didn't have a same-ass sponsor in the Senate. But I took it and we fought and we got that passed. And now in the state of New York, if a police officer chokes anyone and causes serious injury or death, they will do jail time. We're not waiting for them to police themselves. We as society will police them. And I would just say one more thing because Dr. Dukes mentioned it. I have a bill now in the state that is called the Wandering Officers Act. What the bill basically says is if a police officer is fired in one jurisdiction, they cannot get hired in another. Very simple bill. And we are going to get that bill passed this year and so many more because we and the state of New York are the most progressive state in the union, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that this day does not have to happen for any other family ever again. Thank you very much.
Reverend Dr. Johnny Green.
The tireless
globetrotter from Tarsus, in Romans 8:28, became an advocate of the doctrine of total good when he said, "And we know that all things work together for the good to them that love the Lord, to those who are called according to his purpose." Something good can come from something tragic. We witnessed on this day a year ago the senseless and heinous murder of George Floyd. But today, we have gone from witnessing his murder to demonstration to legislation. I would remind Derek Chauvin and all police officers who commit atrocities against black and brown people of the words of Joseph when he met with his brothers some years later after they had put him in a pit. He said, "You meant it unto evil, but God meant it unto good."
Thank you. Councilman Mark Levine.
Thank you so much, Rachel. 9 minutes and 29 seconds. It's an eternity. It's hard to sit on your knee on a carpeted floor for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. But to kneel on the neck of another human being is the act of a monster. Thank you, Reverend Sharpton, for this powerful display today. You know, before George Floyd was a hashtag, he was a son, he was a brother, he was a father. He was a human being. And so first and foremost today, I am praying for the family and loved ones of George Floyd, that they find a measure of solace. I'm praying that there be a measure of justice for the family of George Floyd and the families of the 1,000 other human beings who were killed by police in the year since George Floyd's murder. 1,000 people in the past year. Amongst them, a 3 times greater likelihood that the victim would be black than white. So as the Reverend so eloquently stated, we need much more than speeches now. We need people to make laws to end this injustice. And I proudly stand with all of you who are fighting for the George Floyd Police Accountability Act. But we also have some work to do in our own house, in the NYPD. We must end the culture of impunity that continues to reign. There must be consequences for police misconduct in this city. There must be. And until we achieve that goal, there will not be solace. We will achieve this goal for the benefit of the families of George Floyd and Anthony Baez and Amadou Diallo and Eric Garner. Thank you to all of you who are standing, kneeling together for this cause. Thank you.
Councilman Robert Cornegy.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much. Collectively, as I looked around on stage, we have over 2 centuries of work in the vineyard for the people of our city and of this country. But while this is happening, I just got to point out to you that there's another narrative that's going on right now as we speak, and that narrative is that we can't demand police accountability and reform and still have a reasonable expectation that we'll be protected in our community. So there's an idea that if we push back and we continue to demand through legislation and policy, through protesting and demonstration, accountability in the police department and accountability in our criminal justice system, then we don't deserve to be protected and be safe in our communities. And I definitely push back against that. It is not mutually exclusive to demand police reform and police accountability and criminal justice reform and criminal justice accountability and still have a reasonable expectation that the men and women who are in our communities will be protected and be safe. That's a message that we have to continue to send to law enforcement and criminal justice officials across the world. I want to thank the National Action Network for always being at the forefront. I want to thank Reverend Sharpton and everybody else who's on his board and who works from this country, from this city to every city, making sure that your voices are heard. Thank you.
Reverend Lawrence Aker.
That's my pastor.
No justice. No peace. No justice.
No peace.
I greet you on this day, on this ominous anniversary of the lynching of George Floyd. We come today on the other side of the Christian calendar, the side of Pentecost, which we celebrate as the birth of the church, the presence of the Holy Spirit in the life of believers. But we also stand today praying for a Pentecost of social justice, a new birth in terms of policing and police reform. And so we want to urge others, we don't celebrate today, but we recognize today. For we have seen this act before. We know the anthology of America, but yet and still we are people of hope. And so today it is our hope that a new birth of social justice will arise out of the ashes. And so we thank Reverend Al Sharpton and all of the National Action Network members, board members, and all those who are advocates of social justice. We continue to fight on. We continue to fight on.
Athena Moore.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I'll be very brief. I think all that has needed to be said has been said. I'm here representing Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer. Over the past 7 years, most of you know me as serving as her director here in Harlem. And today, kneeling for those 9 minutes, we all felt the pain, we felt the sorrow. We know that this is a time of transformation and healing. And now more than ever, like Madam Hazel Dukes, we have to continue to use those scriptures and those songs. For me, the two have been, I won't complain, and the other has been, we who believe in freedom shall not rest. Because it's a reminder that the next generation must continue. The baton has been passed, and we must work with our leaders, our legacy leaders like Reverend Al Sharpton of the past, but we also know that we must be guided towards our future. The future will depend on us, helping to make sure that George Floyd is never forgotten, helping to make sure that Breonna Taylor is never forgotten, and all of the countless others who have been lost to police brutality, to gun violence, to mental health, and all kinds of concerns that have been impacting our community. So I'm here simply standing in solidarity and here to remind us that we must not rest, that we must keep advocating for national standards. We must have reform that includes not only local reform, but national reform. We must have accountability and transparency. We must have the retraining of our officers and not the militarizing of them. We must continue to fight together. Thank you for having me today. I appreciate the National Action Network in honor of George Floyd.
And we will ask that Reverend Patrick Young closes us out.
Thank you, Rachel, and to the vanguard of justice, Reverend Al Sharpton, and to all the board members of NAN, and to you, my brothers and sisters, that we come here to remember, but not just remember, but to speak up and speak out for justice and for we expect justice. My friend, Reverend Lawrence Akers, reminds us that the Christian calendar and Christian foundation is hope. But also the Christian foundation is resurrection. And we remind us that even though death happens, there's resurrection hope. And the resurrection hope is in that we believe justice is going to prevail for the life and for the memory of George Floyd. His death has brought into us the opportunity to have resurrection and for justice for so many of those who died before him, who are not able to, did not receive justice. But because of his death, we will receive justice. And I'm going to celebrate because I know It's going to happen because faith and hope joins together, and things always happen. God bless you.
Thank you very much for coming.